Happy New Year.
Happy New Year and happy Tuesday.
Yes,
Seems like
yes, we're back
forever.
at it. Yes, we're back at it in 2024.
Yes. Fun times.
Yes,
Are
so
you
to
recovering from the holidays?
yes, I've recovered. I am like pushed into the deep end. There's a lot
Yep.
going on, which is a wonderful place to be at the beginning of the year, but it's always important to make sure that priorities are defined and aligned and we're ready to go.
Yep.
So today we are going to talk about data. So your investment in data collection, data that you already have in your organization, and most importantly, how leaving that data in a dormant state, it's never a good thing. So we're going to talk about some of the examples and experiences that we've had throughout our careers. So Deanne, I'll let you kind of jump into it. What are your thoughts about
Well,
data? First of all, let's start with data that you have in-house, organizations that we've encountered and that you've encountered that have data that's sitting on a shelf somewhere and that value that's going untapped.
yeah, well, I think we see it all the time. I think even when we were in house, we saw the same thing. You'd have a lot of data from a lot of sources. I think we'll probably stress that today. What kicked this off was, yeah, it's the new year. We even revisited, hey, what's some of the stuff we have out there that we just haven't acted upon? Let's pull that back up. And then the clients in recent years and probably throughout our careers where you have all of this rich data. And even when you think about some of the research we provide, a lot of times when you follow up, things are still sitting on the shelf. There's no one to kind of take it and run with it, or knowing how do you incorporate that into your existing processes, whether it be development or with product management, whatever it may be. So we see it a lot. You have all this research, usability testing, out there figuring out the white space, things like that. We've talked about discovery work, and it's kind of like, oh, big presentations. Everyone's like, man, that is so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then where does it go from there? A lot of times it ends up in the file system. And maybe when they onboard someone new, they'll say, hey, here's some research we have. Just take a look to catch up. So, I think we see that a lot, and the missed opportunities. I had a recent project where I was brought in and given an objective or a problem statement that they needed to understand. Was going to be in this heavy weighted engagement with research. And the first thing I did was like, well, do you have anything out there? Just give me some access to support calls or, previous research. But even the support calls, it turns out all the data they needed was already in house. I mean, they literally had thousands of data points for the issue and a potential way to solve it. But
Wow.
we're about to engage in a heavy, research effort without taking a look at that data, and having new eyes on the data as well.
You said a lot there, so I want to jump in and
Wow.
kind of dig into that. I love it though. So first of all, one thing to recognize for our listeners is data lives in so many areas of your organization. And I'm sure you all know this, but it's easy to stay in our silo and forget that there's data outside of what we do or what we focus on. So there's analytics. If you have some sort of application or service that you provide where you have automation or instrumentation that's collecting data around people visiting your site, for example. We have data like you mentioned in your customer support organization. Marketing has data. Your UX people and product have data. So you have all these different data sources, logs that are collected. So when you think about all of that data, the first thing that I am hearing is you want to first gather your inventory and assess what you can coming out of that data. And when you think about how that data can also inform the work
Mhm.
that you are paying individuals like ourselves to actually conduct. So that data can sometimes drive what those assumptions are to
Yes.
explore, to test, that sort of thing. So that's a really, I think, a really key point to make. Also, when you think about, the last time you went to a conference, you go to a conference, you get all, charged up, motivated,
Yes.
you want to go back and just solve the world. When you get back to your desk and you just get back to, business as usual, it's the same sort of thing when we deliver insights or a
Yes.
report or wireframes. Teams just go back to business as usual unless we get involved in helping them from an implementation engineering standpoint to implement what we've delivered. That's where we've seen the most value.
Yes, absolutely. And how do you do that implementation? How do you start fitting it into your process going forward when we're not there, so that you don't have this data just sitting there still? So, yeah, it's definitely, and sometimes that is the hard piece. You get the research, you get the data, and I think you and I love to say, now what? Now what? It's not something to be filed away. You've usually spent a lot of money, and time and effort, to get that data. Do something with it. So, I think that's part of what we love. We love those engagements where we can take it to that next phase. We've had many where it was like, nope, we got the data, we're good to go, and then get the call back a month, a month or two later, and actually get that ball rolling. How do you get that data rolled into, tactically, for the short term, or strategically long term goals with, product management and some of the executive stakeholders. So it's the hard part, but it can also be the fun part,
Yeah.
if it's done right. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of when you think about data and kind of some of that root cause in that data just going dormant is teams don't always have the right skill sets available with in-house to be able to look at that data and understand how to pull out insights and pull out potential areas that they can apply to other aspects of the organization or the product or service.
Yeah.
And I like to think one of my motivations for, moving from in-house to consulting was knowing that the skill sets that we have are sometimes underutilized.
Yes.
We are data geeks.
Yes.
Are trained in analyzing data, not only collecting the data, but analyzing data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. There's some level of analysis that has to be conducted. And so having that opportunity or giving someone that opportunity to go around and collect those different data sources can be a project in and of itself.
Yes.
It can be a huge effort in and of itself. I think about a project that we did some time ago where we were tasked with looking at a certain segment of the market for a company that created functionality on mobile devices.
Yes.
Well, they handed over all their analytics, and two things happened. We were able to get more clear on who we were focused on in terms of the definition of that segment. What we also recognized were gaps in their analytics, where
Yeah.
there were things or data points that they were not collecting that relate to the other data points that they were collecting that would have given them a richer picture
Bigger picture.
of their users. So we were able to provide that recommendation, even though it was outside of the scope of the project.
Yep. And I like that what you were saying in terms of falling into what we're talking about, take action on the data. One thing I like to tell UXers, or one thing where we're good about doing as well, is when you do have, especially research activities, or you are doing that analysis, like when we come in and take the existing data, one way to avoid it sitting on the shelf is to have those actionable recommendations. So it's not all about, hey, let's put every problem out there, or let's just tell a story, that the research is giving us, which is good. Tell the story, but what are some actionable things to do. And I think that's another way, and I know I've kind of veered off a little bit, but it's very important to have, actionable recommendations, concrete things that come out of that data, as well. And anyway, you kind of touched upon that. I think that's one thing that does cost just stuff to sit to the side.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we see the data. Now what? And if you can't get someone to pull out something actionable, not throw a persona at development and say, hey, go figure out how you're going to meet these needs. You need actionable data coming out of the research and out of that analysis.
Yeah, I like that. It's if there's no other takeaway from this conversation, you want to look at data in a way where you can say, now what, or and so what, and come
And
up
so
with a
what?
list of things that you can take action on. And it's about those near term, what we call low hanging fruit,
Yep.
and those things that are longer term or more strategic, and understanding where do you disseminate those within your organization, because
Right.
sometimes they're not related to your product or service, and the development or refinement of that, it might be your messaging, on your marketing collateral. It might be the framing that your sales team uses in their engagement. So you want to look at that data and step away from it and say, okay, now what? What are we going to do with this data? The example I used in our newsletter this week was around the experience of an organization that did a survey of 1,200 of their individuals in their segment, in their market, and they, coming out of that data, there was a lot of data that, or a lot of what was coming out of that data were just general demographics around behaviors, where in the country do those individuals reside, what are the needs that they have, that sort of thing, just general survey data. One of the things that was unexpected that came out of it was a white space.
Yeah.
So a segment of the market that was a company size of a particular number across the country, but that white space helped to open up and define a new offering for that organization. Yes. They were able to build a new product off of doing that survey or conducting that survey. And so when you think about that, someone has to either look for that or be able to understand how to decipher that from the data.
Yes, and I think that is a great example that survey data had been out there from what, I remember. I know what you're talking about. It had been out there for a totally different purpose and got some new eyes on it. And to your point, it was that interpretation, that analysis was like, wait a minute, forget all the tools they're using in pain points. Do you realize you have a space out here that no one has a active solution for? And that data had been there and just kind of sitting there until new eyes got on it. And yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, because it led to a huge new offering for that organization. So and kind of disrupted some of the industry at that time. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and the importance in, a naysayer can hear this conversation and say, okay, well, we have data sitting on the shelf. We can get to it whenever we have time, or, when we have bandwidth or investment. The challenge with just letting that data sit on the shelf is data can get stale.
Yes.
Trends change, technology changes, users' expectations and needs change. So the longer you let that data sit out there dormant, the longer or the bigger the risk in that data potentially not having any utility in you making improvements and changes and that sort of thing.
Right. And I do think it's good. I think part of why we have fun is that because I do empathize with people who are in, whether it's small, large organization, you're in that day-to-day grind. I know we're sitting here going, you need to go look at all this data that's everywhere. That's one of the bonuses, I think, since I've been consulting, is that there's just, you can focus on that one thing during that engagement. You're not in that day-to-day grind. So for those who don't have someone who can come
Mm,
in, hone in, get them started, you really do have to be very, very deliberate about
mhm,
making sure to do these things. You have to figure out, okay, how do I embed this process within the development organization, within the product management organization?
mhm,
How does it become a part of how we operate and how we prioritize,
mhm.
generate solutions together, that sort of thing. So it does require a very deliberate effort on the part of whether it's product management, researchers, whoever, has access to that data and needs to be thinking about how to use it.
Yeah, and it also requires some level of collaboration. So
Yes.
once you don't want to bring out or define potential changes and improvements without actually talking to others in the organization, because as we've discussed, you can expect that different people within different roles around the organization will have different perspectives.
Yes.
They have an understanding of your business, customer, that sort of thing. And together, all of that information and collaboration can bring out, okay, what does this mean to our product? What does this mean to
Yeah.
our marketing? You now have a better idea of what that data really means and how to use it
Mhm.
when you've collaborated with others on that, because you're
Yes.
still going to be somewhat siloed in your analysis if you are looking at it from just a product perspective, just a marketing perspective, that kind of thing. So
Right.
it's definitely a team sport in terms of looking at that data and making sense of it.
It has to be. I mean, it almost has to be. You have to get in with those other teams. There's no one
Hmm.
discipline that can usually, certainly not coming from a research perspective. We have to work with development. We have to work with product management. And if you keep us in a silo and throw that data over, it's going to sit there. It's just going to sit there. You really do need to be embedded so you have influence on requirements. Even think about some of the development processes. You have this research you're putting changes in. Hopefully, if you're
Hmm.
have those actionable insights, you want your research activities to kind of coordinate with that as well. So there are like a million reasons to have this close collaboration. One for the iterative development and testing and feedback cycle, and then two, uh, just from gaining that other perspective. Like you said, everyone comes with a different perspective, and getting that data out there where it is actionable,
Right.
so that people will do something with it. And I think the new year was a great time to talk about this because it's
Yes.
fresh start. Let's take a fresh look at things that are there. Identify, where you need more information. Start seeing where you can take action on that data, or to your point earlier, where you need to dig deeper to get the full picture. But take a look at it. Just pull it out. Pull it
Yes.
out with those
Yes.
files and take a look.
And please, please, if you're going to invest the time and money to engage outside
Yeah.
resources and experts, don't you do yourself a huge disservice by going through that process, having them deliver, like we have seen in our experience, having delivered, requirements inputs and wireframes and things that impact the hardware and software connection and that sort of thing, defects that don't relate to what we were tasked with exploring or
Right.
understanding, and having that information just sit on the shelf, you do yourself a great disservice. And this is where I recognized in having conversations with previous clients that a number of them were in that situation, just because the reason that it's like the cart and horse issue.
Yeah.
You brought us in to help you get the insights that you could not get yourselves, either because of the bandwidth challenge or you don't have individuals in your organization that can do that work. But once we're done and things have been delivered, you still don't have the bandwidth or the expertise in house to do that work, to now apply those insights. So for me, 2024 is the year of bringing real value, not
Yes.
just information and the wireframes and the communication of the opportunity, but partnering with clients on making things, bringing those things to life and making things happen.
Yes. So that those follow-up calls aren't, hey, we've got the same problem, and then we look and go, but we haven't had time. We hear that
Right,
a lot. We hear that a lot.
right.
So, yep.
Yeah, and as helpful and as useful as what you all delivered is and was, we still haven't done anything with it. That
Yeah.
breaks my heart because um, when you have passion for what you do, it's almost, it's heartbreaking to know that all of that information and that value that you've just invested in is going to me, it's kind of going to waste because it
Yes.
will get stale at some point.
They get stale. Yep.
Markets change, users change, that sort of
Yes.
thing. On the flip side, I think in this conversation, what I'm also hearing is I've seen a lot on social media where people are shifting out of academia into industry and
Hmm.
people like ourselves that have PhDs that may have been in a lab are getting roles inside of organizations. And the one thing I think that needs to be a takeaway for those individuals is that when you do this work of looking at the data, and like you mentioned earlier, you want to be able to tell a story to others in your organization. But I want to reiterate, you've got to be able to bring out the and so what, now what's next, that sort of
Yes.
thing, in that kind of where that story rounds down and ends up is telling the rest of the organization, here are the opportunities, or let's collaboratively brainstorm around those potential opportunities.
Exactly. Yep. So that we can take action on them. And yes.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly, exactly. So, what do you think is the best way for our listeners to capitalize off of making sure that they don't let stuff sit on the shelf? What are the two things that you would recommend?
Well, that cross-functional collaboration, you've got to be connecting with whether develop and the people who can champion your recommendations. So
Mhm.
that's the first. How do you get embedded on those teams and make sure you're part of that process? Um, B, have actionable data. That is a really, really big one. That a lot of times there's data that isn't actionable. It's there. You've got to make it actionable. Your research needs to be actionable. So those are like two of the, to me, some of the biggies is getting on those right teams, collaborating, making sure you're part of the process. I know easier said than done. We could have a whole session, a live stream about how to do that, because I know you and I in house fought and got processes in place to try to do that. But really make sure the data, you're not just tell your story, but do make sure people can do something with it. Make sure it is actionable or the next steps happen to make it actionable.
Mhm. And my one takeaway is, and we talked about this in a previous sessions, a lot of your data may be quantitative. So it may be, large numbers, data that you can analyze for trends and that sort of thing. Once you've done that work to identify and analyze that quantitative data and you find some sort of trends to explore, the next thing you've got to do is that qualitative
Yes,
effort to understand the why and the how,
yes,
because that quantitative data will not give you that. And so when we talk about dormant data or the data we deliver, there may be a part two that gets you to that place of being able to say, here are the things that we need to do, or here's why we need to change things in this way. And
yes,
that data is really, really important to team dynamic, team trust, and being effective in delivery.
yes. Good
Awesome.
one.
Awesome. Well, if there are no questions, we are signing off for today. Thank you so much for listening. Have an awesome week. Have a great 2024, and we will see you next time.
Yes. Bye.